Fellow explorers, welcome to another Yellow Productions live stream. Today we're going to be talking about the worst airports in the United States of America. This is coming hot off the heels of last week's live stream, which was all about the best airports in the world. And we started talking about ones that people hate, and a lot of them were in the U.S. And so I thought we would do one all about the worst airports in the U.S. because the U.S. does seem to have some of the worst airports. Inefficiencies, poor designs, endless waits, rubbery food, and a general sense of chaos seem to be a good description for many airports in the USA. In this ranking list, we're going to start with the 10th worst airport, work our way down to the first worst airport. These airports are airports that have more than 10 million passengers per year on average through them, and the ranking itself is actually based on the J.D. Power Consumer Satisfaction Survey that they did in 2020, where they surveyed about 20,000 passengers through American airports and asked them to rank the airports in 6 factors: terminal facilities, airport arrival and departure, baggage claim, security check, check-in and baggage check, and finally, food, beverage, and retail. So those are the ratings that this ranking is based on. Now, as we go through this top 10 list, I'm also going to be sharing some of my own perspectives as to what makes these airports awful. I also polled all of you, the fellow explorers that watch Yellow Productions. About 100 of you responded with your inputs as to what you think the worst airports and why, and so I'll also be sharing some of your perspectives throughout this. If you're on the live stream, definitely share your perspectives about the airports we're talking about as we're talking about them. And if your comment is great about it, about the airport being bad, then I will put it up on the screen as we go through. Now, before we get to the 10th worst airport, I do want to mention what J.D. Power considered a good airport. They said the best airports on their list were the ones that people felt like the airport was a mall-like experience, like a well-run shopping mall, and that the airports gave a little bit of local flavor in the shopping, in the architecture, and in the food. So conversely, the ones that are on this worst list are going to be ones that don't run like well-run shopping malls, that don't have any local flavor, and could probably be best described as, warehouses for like human purgatory, where you're just like waiting and waiting and waiting to get on that plane that maybe never comes because it's delayed, is some of the reasons why some people hate these airports. All right, and the last thing I want to say before we get started is the total number of inputs. So there were 100 of you that responded on the input requested post. So as I talk about these airports as we go through, I'll say how many of you selected this particular airport as one of your least favorite airports. All right, so the 10th worst airport in the USA is the George Bush Intercontinental Airport. George Bush Intercontinental Airport. This is in Houston. This is the hub airport for United Airlines, formerly Continental Airlines. Some of the big cons about this airport: a lot of flight delays out of this airport in Houston, a lot of cancellations, and significant TSA wait times. So how many flights are canceled? Delayed. 17% of the flights last year out of George Bush Intercontinental Airport were delayed. 3% of them were canceled, which is actually a pretty high cancellation rate for all flights out of an airport. It is only second worst in cancellations to Newark Airport, which might just be appearing a little bit later on this list. Houston Intercontinental is also one of the bottom 5 airports when it comes to TSA wait times, so the lines can be pretty long. When I looked up reviews of George Bush Houston Airport recently on Facebook and Yelp and places like that, people now were complaining a lot about a lack of social distancing, mask compliance, and a lack of cleaning, not feeling that they're taking COVID-19 seriously. And I will point out, it is Texas after all. Now, Moises points out that, actually the airport's quite nice. And looking at some parts of the airport are quite nice. Some parts of the airport, on the other hand, are not not that well remodeled. Now, Chase says, oh my goodness, Greyhound stations are the worst. Terrible, stressful place with terrible food. They probably are, but this is about airports and not bus stations, so we'll be talking about airports. All right, let's go on to the 9th worst airport in the USA. It is San Francisco International Airport. What's wrong with San Francisco International Airport? The cons: weather delays and long lines. Weather delays. Yes, San Francisco is an airport that looks like this, and I'm going to make this bigger. It's a dual runway airport, but one of the big problems with San Francisco as a dual runway airport is the runways are not far enough apart. They're only 700 feet apart, which means that two planes cannot land at the same time when there is little visibility. Now, how little is the visibility? Well, this is a picture at San Francisco International Airport. United plane is waiting to take off, and the British Airways plane is coming in for a landing, and so it can often be really foggy. San Francisco International Airport is one that I fly through quite often, and if I have connections through San Francisco, I make sure to book at least 3 hours between my connections. That's how bad the flight delays can be out of San Francisco. Out of the 100 people polled of you fellow explorers, there were 2 of you that said San Francisco was the worst airport. And what you all said is, I've been delayed a lot in San Francisco, but the airport itself is nice, last I remember. That was what one fellow explorer said. Another fellow explorer said, OMG, it was worse because we were stuck there for hours. There was no decent food, not even a McDonald's. And honestly, it puts me off going to San Francisco just having to change planes, and it seemed too small for an airport. Now, I always have this issue at San Francisco Airport when connecting, like if you're coming in internationally, I seem to always miss this little hallway that says like for connecting flights go this way, because it like, even though it's a big sign, it like hides behind all the passport control people, and then I end out on the street and I'm like, how do I get back in the airport? But actually, I think the worst thing about San Francisco Airport, and this is something that happened recently in the last year or two, is that San Francisco Airport no longer sells bottled water. That's right, you cannot purchase water in a bottle because the city of San Francisco passed a ban in the city of San Francisco selling water bottles on city of San Francisco city government property. The airport is city government property, therefore they cannot sell plastic bottles of water. You can buy water in a glass, you can buy water in a box, you can buy Coca-Cola in a plastic bottle, you just can't buy a bottle of water in a plastic bottle. Gary says, yes, San Francisco is definitely one of the worst airports. Dawson says, I was there 3 years ago and it was okay. Charlie says, Oakland Airport is dark but less delays. Oakland Airport, for those that are geography challenged in the San Francisco Bay Area, San Francisco Airport is on the western part of the bay, so it gets more fog. Oakland is on the eastern part of the bay, so Oakland and San Jose airports get less. Thomas says, foggy in San Francisco. Shocked. Amanda says, blame the weather. Don says San Francisco has a nice mall atmosphere. I guess it depends on which terminal in particular, but I think that in the international terminal there are some nice shops in there, but not all of it. And Zachary does say, I would totally choose San Francisco Airport over LAX. However, well, we're only number 9 on this list, so LAX just might be coming up. And yes, actually, San Francisco Airport being better than LAX, a lot of airlines, included United Airlines, has been moving a lot of its Asia-bound traffic, direct flights, out of LAX in favor of San Francisco because United often says that San Francisco is a better, but people like the airport better than they like LAX. Thomas says San Francisco's an obscenity, and Kenisha says we waited an hour to be able to take off. There were so many planes waiting for sure. When they only have one runway, and that does takeoffs and landings, it can take a long time to take off and land. And yes, there was a comment to say, wasn't San Francisco one of the places with an accident? It sure was. And actually, I guess if we go back to this picture of the airport here, yeah, the runway is actually pretty short and there's not much room before it. So it was, if I remember correctly, an Asiana Airlines flight that clipped the end of that runway. Okay. Now, a couple things I like at San Francisco International Airport, things that make it good. I really like the American Express Centurion Lounge. It's the reason, almost the reason that I have the American Express Platinum card is to go to that lounge in San Francisco Airport because I connect there so often. The food's really good in the Centurion, nice place to hang out. It does get way too busy though. And I think San Francisco Airport is one of the best places in the U.S. for in-airport dim sum. There's this famous dim sum restaurant in San Francisco, Daly City technically, called Koi Palace, and they have an express location, which if you walked by it, you'd think it's like steam table Chinese food, but they do actually really good dim sum, hargao, and shumai, so that's one of my go-to things to eat when I go to San Francisco. Nosferatu says, as a frequent traveler from Holland, I just love strolling around airports, a nice feeling of freedom. You know, I actually love strolling around airports too. When I have a long layover, I walk the airport. I walk from the beginning to the end and just kind of explore every nook and cranny. And Nosferatu says there's 177 watching. That's a lot. Thank you. Actually, 190 right now. So everybody who tuned in, thank you very much. If you're enjoying this video, I'd really appreciate it if you give it a thumbs up. Lets me know you like it, but more importantly, lets YouTube know you like it so that they share this video and videos like this with other people. So one of the best things you can do to help out the channel is give videos a thumbs up. All right, let's move on to the 8th worst airport in the USA, Seattle-Tacoma International Airport. According to J.D. Power, that was the number 8th worst airport. The biggest cons, old and tired facilities. Seattle-Tacoma Airport is desperately in need of a renovation, and they're not awful, they just don't look nice and amazing. And I think that when people fly into a tech hub like Seattle, headquarters of Microsoft, headquarters of Amazon, they're expecting a much better, swankier airport. I think the lounges have a little something to be desired there as well. Seattle is the primary hub for Alaska Airlines. That's kind of their home city. There was one fellow explorer that said they did not like Seattle-Tacoma International Airport. Literally, they just put in 2 words, which they said, SeaTac sucks. The one pro of Seattle-Tacoma International Airport, the thing I like about it when I fly in there, I like the light rail. This is the light rail that runs from the airport right into downtown Seattle. So if you're going to downtown Seattle from SeaTac Airport, it's pretty easy and convenient just to hop on that light rail and get dropped off into the city center. Andrea agrees and says SeaTac does suck. Well, thank you for that, Andrea. Wu Tai says, Seattle was terrible because they took forever and made me miss a flight, but it was Northwest, so it was expected. That was probably a while ago when Northwest was still a thing. And Eric says it's probably not in this video, but he's always had a bad experience at Reno Tahoe Airport. Reno Tahoe Airport, not on this list. Brandon says Amazon and Microsoft should pour money in this airport. They should. I think maybe they would if they could, but I don't know that they've actually figured out how to do that. Yeah, Mr. Means to Travel says SeaTac has a Centurion Lounge, but it's like a really tiny one. Maybe they call it a pop-up, so it's something definitely to pass on. Robert says, my biggest issue with American airports are long security lines and check-in lines. They can be quite long. Gary says Seattle-Tacoma is the dirtiest airport I've been to. Candy says SeaTac. I thought the walk from the gate to baggage claim was super long to me. So speaking of baggage claim, you know, I talked at the beginning about how J.D. Power asked consumers to rate these things. Some things I absolutely look at when I consider airports, because people asked me this last time on the best airports. I look, number one, probably one of my most important things is dining options inside security and outside security, because sometimes you want to eat outside security. So, and there's some airports you get to and you're like, well, unless you're through security, there's nothing to eat. So dining on both sides. Cleanliness is really important to me. The security lines, I hate standing in lines for hours. I hate that variability. The nicety of the employees, how nice the employees are. We haven't gotten to the New York airports yet, and you know they're going to be on this list. Their employees often aren't that nice. And then finally, how long is the walk? Do you need to take 2 trains or 3 trams or things like that? And surprisingly, there are airports in the U.S. that you need to take like multiple shuttle buses or a train and a bus to get from check-in to where your flight's going to be. Okay, let's go on to dun dun dun, the 7th worst airport in the USA. Many of you have been waiting for this airport. I know it. The 7th worst airport in the USA is Los Angeles International Airport, and I am sure that many of you are shocked that Los Angeles Airport is only the 7th worst airport on this list. But some of the cons about Los Angeles International Airport, bad customer experience. People just don't like it. They get a bad taste in their mouth when they go to LAX. Traffic congestion, confusing layout, old facilities. Everybody hates the double-decker U. It can take an hour to go around. What do I mean by the double-decker U? Well, this is Los Angeles International Airport, and looking at that picture, you can see in the middle, so like the runways are on the sides, and then in the middle, you see the terminal buildings, and then there's kind of this like horseshoe-shaped road. It only goes in one direction. It's 2 stories, so it's double-decker, and to get to one of the 9 terminals, you have to drive around this road. And when the airport's busy, it can take over an hour to drive around that small little road. It's really kind of crazy. I got a little bit of video that I'm just going to play about LAX and talk over it as you see it. So this is the horseshoe road, and you can see just how slow that goes. This is taken from probably the Tom Bradley International Terminal. We're looking out kind of towards Century Boulevard, but the traffic barely moves. The parking structures in the middle, I think it's like $50 a day to park at those parking structures in the middle. Here's another shot. The nicest part of LAX is the Tom Bradley International Terminal, which in this picture you see on your left. Now, I mentioned that I'm sure many of you are surprised that LAX is only number 7 on this list, because there were 18 of you that voted LAX as the worst airport in the USA. Out of 100, 18 of you is a pretty impressive amount to say this is the worst airport. Now, some things that also people dislike about LAX are how long it takes for baggage claim. It can often take a long time. Also, people cite the long lines for customs and security. If you arrive in the international terminal and then you're connecting domestic on maybe like United, you often have to collect your baggage, walk outside, like actually outside in the open air, and then walk back in after a 15-minute walk to get to the other terminal. Oh, and here's what standard check-in looks like at LAX, like a zoo most of the time. And then like some of the terminals are actually connected underground. It's really hard to tell which ones are connected underground, but when you can walk through them, these are what the tunnels look like between the airports. These were clearly not designed to really have people in them, but at some point they were like, hey, we could use these tunnels to get people to go between the terminals airside, and they are in COVID times, I would say they seem like great places to catch COVID. Stuffy air, no airflow, really cramped. P. Nguyen says to avoid the horseshoe, we would often drop off at arrival instead of departure. That's a good plan. Sometimes I actually, if I take an Uber or a shuttle bus from a parking structure, I just ask to be dropped off at Terminal 1 and I'll walk. Like I'll walk all the way across to Terminal 8 instead of sitting my way all around that horseshoe. Brandon says LAX should modernize before the Olympics comes to Los Angeles. Well, speaking of modernization, so LAX is in the middle of a big renovation plan, and this is looking at like a rendering of what LAX is going to be when it's done. It has this famous building in the middle that looks like some sci-fi building. It's closed. There's nothing in it right now. It used to be a restaurant, but they're building a people mover and a tram that's also supposed to connect LAX to the Los Angeles subway when it's done. I don't know. I think it's like too late and not enough. But I mean, they're making it better, and you can tell it's better. But even when it's better, it still seems to be pretty bad. Jerry agrees the horseshoe road there is terrible. I don't remember a single time the traffic is not crowded, neither arrival nor departure. Yeah, and actually, one of the busiest times at the airport, you might not believe this, is like 11 p.m. or midnight, because there's a gazillion flights that leave midnight, 1 a.m. To Asia. You'd think, oh, I'm going to the airport at midnight. There's going to be no traffic. Not so much. Jared says, Tom Bradley International Terminal, after you get through security, is actually quite nice. Good food and drink options. I will say, I do really like the Star Alliance Lounge that's in the Tom Bradley International Terminal, but the rest of the airport really kind of sucks. And so does baggage claim and customs and all the stuff that's like underneath the international terminal. Chard says most people hate LAX because you need to wait a long time. We have waited for hours in baggage claim. I kid you not, like maybe 2 hours in LAX to get off the plane, get our bags, get through customs, and get out to the street. It's crazy. Carmen loves LAX. Carmen, you are a sweetheart. You must be that you love LAX. And Kathy points out not just flights to Asia, but also their flight to Australia left at midnight. Yeah, there's a ton of midnight departures out of LAX. And Potato Bun says, I find LAX to be confusing to maneuver through. It is. And one of the things, I guess this picture didn't get in here. They made this lot called the LA Exit lot. Now to take an Uber leaving LAX, there's a special lot you have to go to. So you can't take an Uber curbside at LAX. You have to take a shuttle bus to a special lot where then you can take an Uber. It's really bad. There were 18 people that submitted LAX, and so I'm not going to read through all of them, but just a couple highlights of what people said. Originally, LAX is the worst. Traffic easily backs up for miles. It's just a terrible experience. One of the worst customs areas. No monitors showing connecting gates. It's ugly. This is here's a good one. LAX has long lines, difficult to get between terminals. I couldn't find a working vending machine to even get snacks when our red eye was delayed. And if you have to get picked up or dropped off from there because there's no good public transportation, you owe tons of huge favors to that person that does it. Obsolete legacy layout cobbled together over decades, chaotic operations. So, and leaky roofs too. I have seen leaks from the roofs. Such a great place, and yet I fly out of it all the time, and there's tons of flights that go there, and so people keep going to LAX because it has the flights that get to places. It's just not a great experience. Some really good experiences. Hoshi AM recommends Long Beach Airport. Just to the south in Orange County, John Wayne International Airport in Orange County. In J.D. Power's list of best medium-sized airports, John Wayne Airport was number 2 best airport in the U.S. So if you're looking for an airport you can fly into that's not LAX, that you can get to LA, check out John Wayne, Orange County. What's Chris drinking today? Chris today has a drink from this place called Mingo. It is a mango, coconut, and sago drink. So there's little sago bits that are floating around in there with this big thing, a mango puree and coconut milk. It's pretty good. Thomas agrees with me that John Wayne was excellent. And not leaving Las Vegas, Boy, there's a comment. Stephen from Not Leaving Las Vegas has joined in. Welcome. He says Tom Bradley gets really dated in spots. It does. The central part of Tom Bradley International Terminal is nice, but the wing still can be a bit dated. Okay. Let's go on to the 6th worst airport in the USA. The 6th worst airport in the USA is the Fort Lauderdale-Hollywood International Airport in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. We're going to the other coast of the U.S. here. What's wrong with this airport? Constantly seems to be under construction. There's a lot of traffic congestion here as well. Why? Because more and more people keep moving to Fort Lauderdale. More beachgoers are going there. And Fort Lauderdale, I'm going to make this picture big so you can see the two planes in there because they're the point of this comment, is that Spirit Airlines and JetBlue Airlines, the two planes you see on that picture, have increased their operations significantly in Fort Lauderdale, leading to tons of people coming there because the flights are cheap, which ends up to be a bunch of traffic. Fort Lauderdale also has a similar U-shaped road like LAX that everybody seems to hate. 2 of you said you dislike the Fort Lauderdale-Hollywood International Airport, and also it has that same problem that to catch a connecting flight, just like LAX, you have to go outside the terminal, walk down the road, and then go back in. So maybe, I don't know, maybe when they built Fort Lauderdale, they just took the plan from LAX and said, hey, we are going to do that here. And related to the drink that I'm drinking, Carmen says it looks tasty. It is pretty tasty. Brett says Fort Lauderdale makes you feel like you're landing on the highway when you land there because it's close to the highway. Muhammad wants to know if the privatization of U.S. airports will lead to improvements from a Singaporean. Singapore airport's amazing. It was #1 on my world's best airports. I don't know, because London Heathrow's privatized, and I don't know that London Heathrow's great. So I think there's a lot of issues that make airports in the U.S. Bad, sad. And Wu Taiwan says, I see Spirit Airlines. No! And Carmen says, hey, as long as you read the rules, all will be well. And I guess that's assuming you can live by the rules. All right. Let's go on to the 5th worst airport in the USA. Dun, dun, dun. It is! This isn't dramatic now that I have it on the screen, right, as I do that. But anyway, the 5th worst airport in the U.S. is Chicago O'Hare International Airport in Chicago, Illinois. Chicago O'Hare is the 2nd busiest airport in the country after Atlanta. Each year, Chicago O'Hare sees some 37 million passengers transit through Chicago O'Hare and 900,000 flights. A lot of people go through here. Some of the big cons at Chicago O'Hare, overcrowding and delays and cancellations. Actually, some parts of the terminal can be quite nice, looking like this. This is like Terminal C, where United flies out of. But, Chicago O'Hare often looks like this. In the winter, for me, Chicago O'Hare is just a hard avoid because there are so many weather delays out of Chicago O'Hare. By the way, Chicago O'Hare, in addition to being snowy, Chicago is known as a windy city, so there's a lot of wind, there's a lot of gusts. And I guess if we're talking about staff that isn't friendly, Chicago O'Hare is the airport famously where in 2016 United Airlines drug Dr. Dow off the plane for his involuntary denied boarding. 20% of the flights coming into Chicago on average are delayed. So this is another airport that you need to book extremely long layovers. Out of the 100 of you that answered my poll, originally 11 of you said you dislike Chicago O'Hare as your most disliked airport. Wu Tai says, I spent a lot of time staring at a dull window in Chicago. I got pizza there that looked like a used diaper in a box. You would think, since it's Chicago, the pizza should be good, but the pizza is really mediocre at best. Steven said fly to Midway Airport instead, which is the other airport in Chicago. Let's see. T and Ham says Midwest during the winter is guaranteed cancellations for sure. B Aviation said, I liked O'Hare. It was a little confusing, but it's huge. So a pro of Chicago O'Hare is if you do have a long layover and you like to explore airports, there's a lot to walk around in Chicago O'Hare. And again, as someone who likes to walk around, I have walked around all of Chicago O'Hare. Andrea says, maybe it's the airline. I've always liked O'Hare United. I will say, Andrea, that the terminals that United uses at Chicago O'Hare, I think, are some of the nicest, where American Airlines fly out of and things like that. They're smaller. The roofs aren't as big, right? This was the United terminal. I didn't put pictures of the American terminals. They're smaller, busier, more crowded. There is one thing I like at Chicago O'Hare, which is Tortas Frontera. This is a restaurant by Rick Bayless of PBS Mexican cooking fame. They have really excellent tortas. These tortas are a reason for me to fly to Chicago O'Hare. That's the food I always get there, and I definitely do not get the pizza. What some of your fellow explorers said about Chicago O'Hare. One of our Swiss explorers said, "When I was at a convention, a few of us Swiss talked about airports, and one guy said nothing worse than O'Hare." So, at a convention very far away from Chicago, somebody was saying Chicago O'Hare is awful. Hate it with a passion. The only answer to most hate airport is Chicago O'Hare. And that it can take a long time to go to gates. The people who work there don't know what they're doing, and they change the gates a lot. And then one fellow explorer said, "Even the restaurants left a bad taste in my mouth." Pun intended. Ha ha ha. Justin said that's United Hub, isn't it? Chicago is United's. United has a lot of hubs, but their primary hub is Chicago O'Hare. That's where their corporate offices are. A lot of their corporate staff are out of Chicago O'Hare. Wu Tai asks if I like prickly pear items. That is a prickly pear juice, and I love the prickly pear juice at Tortas Frontera. Let's see. Mo Rock says, I live here and it sucks. Mo Rock, do you live in Chicago O'Hare Airport? Because there was a news story recently about someone who spent the last 3 months hiding out in Chicago O'Hare Airport because, he lives in California and didn't want to come back because COVID was so bad. So he stole an employee ID and was just hanging out in Chicago O'Hare Airport for 3 months. I think that's pretty crazy, and that says a little bit to me about airport security there. All right, let's go next on the list. Number 4, I heard someone say it in the comments. Mo Rock says Philadelphia, and then Steven says, what's wrong with Philadelphia? Well, let's talk about what's wrong with Philadelphia International Airport. Philadelphia International Airport is notorious for its disorganization, lack of cleanliness, and terrible customer service. The airport is definitely not a fabulous looking airport. This is another one where about 20% of departures and arrivals are delayed on an average year. Many people say the escalators don't work, the water fountains don't work. 2 of your fellow explorers said Philadelphia International Airport, and they said that the construction equipment failure every time they've flown through it. And one person said, with my 600,000 lifetime miles, I can unequivocally state that Philadelphia is the worst airport in the U.S. between the disgustingly dirty conditions in every corner and the horribly rude staff. It's not even close. And then this person goes on to say, which I thought was funny, the propensity of LAX, and I'm not going to tell you the next one, on this list reminds me of how many people want to say The Godfather and Shawshank Redemption are their favorite movies. Too easy. Too easy. So ragging on LAX is too easy. So let's rag on some airports that aren't as easy. Steven says, I flew out of there and it was okay. But Kirk says, how did I know it was going to show up? I had a horrible experience, waited for a delayed flight for about 20 hours. That is awful. Let's see. Okay, let's go on to the third worst airport in the U.S. This might be controversial for many of you, but the third worst airport, according to J.D. Powers and their customer satisfaction rating, is Honolulu International Airport in Honolulu, Hawaii, on the island of Oahu. Coming down from arrivals into baggage claim, that's what you're greeted with. You're greeted with the sign that says, Aloha, welcome to Hawaii. What do people dislike about Honolulu International Airport? It's a really old airport. It has really minimal air conditioning, and the airport really runs on Hawaiian time. So let's unpack those things and talk about those. So this is the ticketing area at Honolulu International Airport. This is where you check in. This might look like it's inside, but I want you to look up at the ceiling. Over there. Look up at the ceiling. Over there. There's fans in the ceiling. Why are there fans in the ceiling? Because this is actually outside. I mean, it has a roof, but it's open to the air. Hawaii, Honolulu can be really hot and really humid. And so you're in this airport, checking in, going through security without any air conditioning. It can be really excruciating, particularly if you're running or rushing, which many of us do at airports. And it's also, much of it is really outdated. Some of your fellow explorers said the 1960s called and they want their airport back. I mean, this is what like one of the gate areas looks like at this airport, an airport that has millions of passengers that fly through it every year. Now, a lot of the food at Honolulu Airport is pretty mediocre. If I'm eating there, the one thing I do get is at the Lahaina Chicken Company. They have a really good rotisserie chicken and like a Hawaiian plate. We can get the rotisserie chicken, fried rice, mashed potatoes with gravy, and of course, macaroni salad in true Hawaiian style. That's the bright part of Honolulu. Richard says, I've flown through there over 10 times, never had any problems, love the heat. Did I mention the lounges? The lounges in Honolulu Airport are awful. The lounges are not good at all. Jared says, just got back from Honolulu. It's a terrible airport. I know COVID has ruined a lot of things, but you couldn't even get a drink there. How can Starbucks and Burger King be the only thing open? It's funny you mentioned that, Jared, and maybe you fly United or out of where United flies, but I've had the similar experiences flying out of there 6, 7 in the morning. I get there, and Burger King and Starbucks are the only two things open. Jeff asks if it's been updated since I was last there in the 80s. They built a new rental car facility that I think has made the experience worse. The lines at the rental car facility, I've often stood in line for an hour to get my rental car, even as a premium budget Avis, whomever member. It doesn't matter. The lines are equally long for the premium lines as they are for the regular lines. And it's really confusing. The signage is not very good. I consider myself somebody who is a fair expert in navigating airports, and I've gotten lost in Honolulu airports. There were 3 of your fellow explorers that said this was their worst airport in the world, or in the U.S. One fellow explorer said Wi-Fi was only recently installed, maybe a couple years ago, and there's also hardly any phone chargers at the gates. Points Traveler says the A&A Lounge at HNL is amazing. Where is the A&A Lounge at HNL? Maybe it's in a different part of the airport than I ever go to, because the last time I was there, there was no A&A Lounge. Henry says the A&A Lounge is fabulous. Star Alliance Golden Gate Unit is much better than the United Club. I need to find the A&A Lounge because, let's see, last time I was there, it was the Hawaiian Lounge and then some weird Priority Pass lounge that didn't even have any decent food. Let's see. Henry says, I flew Delta from Honolulu and they didn't open check-in until 3 hours before departure. I understand COVID is weird, but I was with 6 suitcases. There were no food options pre-security. Right. So in my earlier mention about how I rate airports, food before and after security is important. Not just after, but before. Because you got 6 suitcases, you can't check in, you're hungry. You need to eat something for sure. And Henry says the A&A Lounge is next to United Club. Well, I'm searching this out the next time I go there. All right. Number 2 on the list, the second worst airport in the USA. Dun, dun, dun. Newark Liberty International Airport. Of course. New York City has 3 major airports, JFK, Newark, and LaGuardia, and these 3 airports collectively lead the nation in delays and cancellations together. And it's a little understandable because it's a busy airspace, they all share it, and so when one gets delayed, they all get delayed, but I feel like their airport operations contribute to their delays significantly. Newark for United is also one of their big hubs to go internationally. And this is what the security line at Newark can often look like. That looks like a really enjoyable place to stand in. MP says Newark Airport, no surprise for sure. This is what some of the terminals look like, really old and dated and kind of sad. Some have been renovated a little bit, but a lot of them look like this. The food in Newark Airport is really quite abysmal. The way Newark Airport did their food, they've contracted it out to a single company per terminal. So in Terminal B, all the food is by one company. It's not even chains. It's like the random pizza place and the random Philly cheesesteak place, and the Philly cheesesteak costs $15, and it's like the worst Philly cheesesteak you're ever going to have. Couple videos that I'm going to show you of Newark that we'll just talk about as we see these. So we'll take a look at this one. This is looking at the air train going through Newark Airport. There's Spirit Airlines. It's our favorite. But Newark is also really hard to get to from New York. You can either take a expensive cab ride or Uber ride, which is usually what I do, that costs $75, $100, $125 to get into Manhattan, or you have to take two different trains. You have to take the air train to the Amtrak train. It is not very straightforward on getting out of the airport. Now, this is looking at the United planes that are there. One neat thing about Newark out of the United Lounge is you can see downtown Manhattan, so you can see the skyline of Manhattan right there in the back. Tanner says avoid Newark at all costs. That's probably a good plan. Justin says, I had the worst slice of pizza at Newark. Isn't that sad, since New York is known for some of the best pizza in the world, and I agree with you. It is bad. Charlie says, isn't it interesting that the 4 biggest cities in the U.S. have airports on this list? It is kind of sad for that. Matt says, I disagree. Where I lived in New York City, it was much easier and cheaper to get to Newark than JFK or LaGuardia. I believe you. We've still got one more airport to go, Matt, so don't fret on that one. And Waka says Terminal C is all United Airlines. Wu Taiwan says Newark is nothing but a broke New York. And so there were 5 of your fellow explorers that rated Newark in their worst airports list. What did people say? Well, they said they hated that air train system that I showed you because the trains can take at most 20 passengers. Good luck catching a flight at Newark at rush hour because it's really hard to get from downtown Manhattan to there. Someone said, don't get me started on Newark. Getting through security in any airport can be frustrating at times, but Newark is the worst. It's an awful airport and rather boring, I might add, once you get through security. And that sums it up really well. Newark is super boring. As another walker around terminals, there's nothing interesting to see or do in Newark. And there's a United Lounge that I mentioned, but it's a really sad United Lounge that is really just poorly air conditioned. And I get in there and I'm like, I'm so hot. The food's bad in here. The seats are reupholstered last 20 years ago. Tanner says U.S. airports are best mediocre. I think there's actually some really nice U.S. airports. They're not as nice as the great Asian airports, but some can actually be pretty good. Hoshi AM says, drum roll for number 1. Number 1. The number 1 worst airport in the USA. LaGuardia Airport. Also in New York City. Now, today is the day of the inauguration in the USA, and I will tell you, in a rare showing of bipartisan agreement, both Donald Trump and Joe Biden, Republicans and Democrats, in their speeches have talked about how bad LaGuardia Airport is. So the fact that both parties can agree on that lets you know that this decrepit and overcrowded airport is the U.S.'s worst, and among one of the world's worst. And, at first, it seems like it should be a great airport to fly into because it's actually quite close to Midtown Manhattan. But as Matt said earlier, there are There are zero good public transportation options to get in and out of LaGuardia. The security checkpoint is way too small for the number of passengers that go through it. Doesn't that look like a great place to be? Doesn't that look like Where's Waldo or something like that? And the buildings are crumbly, they're leaky, the concourses are narrow, and there's really very few things to eat. That's welcome to LaGuardia Airport. And, I think one of the best things about LaGuardia is the Saturday Night Live sketch that they did on it. I'm just going to play like 9 seconds of this, but Saturday Night Live did a whole... Saturday Night Live did a whole 10-minute sketch on it, which is actually one of my favorite Saturday Night Live sketches. You can check it out after you watch this video if you want to. Just search for Saturday Night Live LaGuardia or Saturday Night Live Airport Sushi. But here's the song they did about LaGuardia.
I like to wait at LaGuardia. Lots of delays at LaGuardia. Too small for planes at LaGuardia.
Watch the man die at LaGuardia.
There we go. Watched a man die in LaGuardia. Andrea says that looks like hell. And let's see. Henry says, I remember at LaGuardia there was an escalator underwater when I was there. That is impressive for sure. Tarantino says it's nice to see it finally being redone. They are doing construction at LaGuardia, which hopefully should make it better. Too little, too late for sure. Justin says LaGuardia only has 2 runways, not enough. Jake says, what would my personal choice been for the worst airport in America? I agree. I agree with number 1 and 2. Really, I agree with number 1 and 2 of LaGuardia and Newark. If I had to maybe re-rank them just on my own travel experiences, I might have moved LAX as number 3. Some notable mentions from your fellow explorers. Also, JFK appeared on this list. That you all said it did not appear on J.D. Power's list. Why? JFK has done a lot of renovations recently. And the other notable mention for people disliking airports was Las Vegas. A lot of hate for McCarran International Airport in Las Vegas. Now, I want to give a couple props to best airports. The best airports, according to J.D. Power in the U.S. Number 1, Phoenix Sky Harbor International Airport. Number 2, Miami International Airport, and J.D. Power says the number 3 best airport in the U.S., according to their survey of 25,000 travelers, was Las Vegas McCarran International Airport. So many of you hated that one, but many people that did the J.D. Power survey loved it.
Fellow explorers, it is now Q&A time. If you've got a question, I've got an answer.
All right, so that was a great list to go through. I loved all of your comments and thoughts. It is now question and answer time because I haven't been answering a lot of questions as we've gone through this. It's also funny as I just look at the numbers on the live stream, currently 286. But as soon as I got to number 1, people were like, that's great, and started to split. By the way, if you've not hit the like button or the thumbs up button on this video yet, please do it. And I want to thank everybody who provided their inputs on this. I want to thank also people who suggested that I do this video. If you've got ideas for other top best videos you'd like to see me do, let me know, because some of the best video ideas actually come from all of you. MP says, Chris, thanks for doing all the research to make this video so great. Thank you, MP, for the kind words. I'm trying to put myself here in the middle, which is about this. Charlie says, domestic terminals in Las Vegas are bad. Yeah, Las Vegas, even though it was highest on the J.D. Power list, it would probably be in my high ones I don't like, because it's often an airport that I feel like I have to take multiple trains to get where I'm going. Stephen asks how I would rank Orlando Airport. Low. I would rank Orlando Airport low. The security lines have often been really long. It's pretty boring. There's not much to do there. Points Traveler wants to know, when's your next trip? Don't know yet, but I will tell you we have speculatively booked a trip to Hawaii in the summer. So, Kevin wants to know, what is the worst airport you've been in that didn't make this list? It's not in the USA. I'm going to call it in Europe. Naples Airport and Naples, Italy is pretty bad. I know we're talking about the US. I think most of my least favorite US airports are in this list. The one that didn't, probably because it's too small, but like Albuquerque International Airport. I've been stuck in Albuquerque a number of times, and there's just nothing to do in Albuquerque. Let's see. Hoshi AM says, I like this new streaming time. I'm always at work when you stream. Well, thank you, Hoshi. I'm glad this worked out to you. I'm kind of all over the place with the streams with COVID time and baby feeding and baby sleeping. Okay. Going here to other questions. JJ says, is San Diego worth moving back to right now? North Park areas or Pacific Beach areas, maybe Mission Valley. I grew up in San Diego, so San Diego has a special place in my heart. I would say yes. I'd say those are great places to go to. Gary wants to know when we're traveling internationally again. I don't know, Gary, since so many places are closed. We just through the holidays renewed all of our passports. They expired like later this year, but we're not going to any places right now. So let's go ahead and update those. Nosferatu says, I'm still hoping for your top 20 troll moments. I did not forget your suggestion on that one, Nosferatu. And Justin says, how do you find time to make these videos? Do you work like 80 hours a week? Something like that. I do. There's spent a lot of time on research, but, hey, I do a live stream once a week, and so an hour or so of research a day gets me up to this, and there we go. Prince Eric wants to know where we live. We live in Orange County, south of Disneyland. Walker wants to know if I like Tampa International Airport. I felt it's decent. I've been there a couple times. I felt like it was a decent airport. I don't know that it was so amazing that it was super memorable, but I had nothing to hate about it. Key West Airport, on the other hand, that place is like a tiny little place that I spent more delays than I really want to. Phil says, do you use Costco Travel? I use Costco Travel to book rental cars. A great way to save money on rental cars is Costco Travel. I almost always book rental cars through Costco Travel. T and Ham says, what food do you steer clear of at the airport? Number one, Mexican food. So I don't want to be that guy in the plane that had a whole bunch of beans and they're like, oh, why did you sit next to me? I don't like things that are greasy in airports. I don't like pizza. I try to stick to things that are not greasy, as probably the opposite. If I can get, free food in lounges, that's often where I go. But I also try to, figure out what the local food is. So if I'm in Atlanta, then I'm going to try to get some like low country food, like some shrimp and grits or, even Popeye's fried chicken, because that's great in Atlanta. So that's what I look for. Let's see. MT Seconds, the top 20 troll moments video. B Aviation wants to know what I think about Ocean Beach in San Diego. Pretty nice place when I visited my friend there. Oh, so for those who don't know, Ocean Beach neighborhood in San Diego has one of the West Coast's longest piers on it. This long concrete pier. Sometimes people call it the Land of Ob. It's a real hippie enclave in San Diego. Ocean Beach has a really interesting kind of funky vibe. I'll say as beaches, I probably prefer La Jolla a little bit better because it's cleaner and nicer. The Ocean Beach is really interesting to, explore and go antiquing. Great for bar hopping if you're into that. I mostly go to Ocean Beach to walk the pier and then walk along Sunset Cliffs, which is pretty nice. Robert wants to know my thought on Honolulu Airport. It made a significantly high number on this list. It's old and tired and really needs a remodel and more air conditioning. That being said, I love the staff at the airport. So for all of my friendly Hawaiians that work at Honolulu International Airport, I love you. Please keep the aloha spirit. My first time flying into Honolulu Airport, I remember going to Budget Rent-A-Car, and the lady who worked at the Budget Rent-A-Car counter, this is pre-moving into the whole Consolidated Rental Car Center, but she was just the friendliest lady ever. And I was like, it's such a great thing to come to Hawaii and just be greeted by that friendly aloha spirit. So much better than flying into Newark, LaGuardia, or JFK and getting yelled at by TSA or CBP or anybody at the airport who just seems to love to yell at people. Chase asks, are there any service or amenities you'd like to see in airports which you haven't seen or currently unavailable? U.S. airports don't have enough transit hotels, like hotels in the airport. U.S. airports also You like Singapore Airport, there's like butterfly gardens, there's like pool tables, there's ping pong tables, there's slides, there's waterfalls, there's koi ponds. Like, that's like stuff we need to come to U.S. airports. We need them to feel like a park and a place to relax. I love in Japanese airports, there's like 7-Elevens and convenience stores and, not the random Newsday, whatever newsstand that sells overpriced magazines and overpriced M&Ms and $8 water, right? Nobody likes that store. Nobody would go to it if it wasn't in the airport. Barry says, I'm planning a road trip in the USA for 2022. What airport should I start, arrive, and where should I finish? Start in, let's say, I would say, start in like Boston, start in the northeast corner of the U.S. and end in San Diego. So Boston, Logan to San Diego. There you go. I think that's a good drive. Takes you all the way across the country from the northeast to the southwest. Prince Eric says, L.A. or New York City. Hope you say L.A. Definitely L.A. That's probably a subject of a whole video, but I don't love New York City. New York City is interesting to visit, but it's expensive. It's crowded. I like LA much more. I'm a beach boy. I love the beach, so I love the beaches in LA. And the closest beach to New York City is Coney Island, which again, I don't hate New York City. Don't hate people who live in New York City. A lot of great culture in New York City that Los Angeles doesn't have. But for me, if I had to pick between Los Angeles and New York City, I would pick Los Angeles. I would just do without the traffic in Los Angeles. Charlie wants to know, what's the best, worst airport hotel? One of my favorite airport hotels was at Haneda Airport. I love staying at the Royal Haneda. It's just like connected to the international arrivals and ticketing part of the airport. Worst airport hotel. I don't know. I've stayed at a lot of awful airport hotels. Probably some Holiday Inn that I stayed at in, outside some French airport or something. I don't even remember. Nosferatu says 205,000 subscribers is growing fast. The recent Las Vegas video that I published on the what's new in Las Vegas for 2021 and what closed brought in a lot of viewers recently and new subscribers. So if you subscribed or came here because of that one, well, welcome to Yellow Productions. Thank you. Lab asks if I ever visit Orlando. It's been a while. I've visited Orlando a few times, visit Disney World, things like that, but I haven't been there in a few years. Robert says Japan airport's like a mall and have lots of food and hotels. I love it. I love that experience. You're never bored when you could walk around a mall, spend your time, stay in a hotel, maybe even stay at a hot spring while you are in the airport.
Yes, it's the time you've been waiting for. It's time for the giveaway.
It is giveaway time, and so what do I do with the giveaway time? Well, as usual on every live stream, I give away a Yellow Productions Crew t-shirt, which is what I'll be giving away today if you answer my question. I'll ship it anywhere in the world. To lucky winner, my question to you for the shirt is, what is the name of my favorite restaurant to eat at in San Francisco International Airport? Not the lounge, there was a restaurant. I put up the picture right here. So if you're the first person to tell me what my favorite restaurant is to eat at San Francisco International Airport, you win a Yellow Productions Crew shirt. And B Aviation says, shout out to Scottman895. He is awesome. Scottman895 has been watching Yellow Productions for a long time. He is great. And speaking of Vegas, Nosferatu says, I found your channel through the worst Vegas hotels video. That is definitely a gateway video into Yellow Productions. Okay, and here we go.
And now we have a winner chicken dinner.
The first person to mention the correct name is the Aristocrat with Koi Palace. Congratulations, Aristocrat. There's a lot of you that said it right at the same time, but the Aristocrat was first. You win a Yellow Productions Crew shirt. So to get it, you can message me on Facebook. You'll find a link to my Facebook page in the description, or you can send me an email to chris@yellow.net with 2 W's. By the way, for anybody who's wondering, Chris, when's your next live stream? This was in a different time. Why is one a different time? Well, if you want to know when my next live stream is. Sign up for my email notification list. Head over to update.yellow-productions.com. I will always let you know, ideally a day or two ahead, when the next live stream is going to be. And I'll also let you know as I publish new videos on Friday what they're going to be, so you don't have to wait and wonder, is it out? You will just see it right there in your email inbox. Well, as usual, I want to say thank you all very much for watching. It was great hanging out with all of you today. Justin says applause, applause, applause. Well, thank you, Justin, kindly. And I won't say goodbye because I'll see you all in the next video.